All right, we're tracking this major story along the Gulf Coast, the massive oil spill from the BP oil rig that exploded and sank 11 days ago. The company plans to dump chemical dispersants around the untapped wellhead, which will bond with the oil, supposedly. That's what they're saying, and it'll cause it to sink to the bottom. President Obama plans to visit the Gulf Coast tomorrow to see how bad the damage is, and concern is growing about how catastrophic the oil spill will be to the fragile ecosystem along the Gulf. Trace amounts are already washing ashore near the Mississippi River Delta today, and birds and marine life have also been coated in oil and are also being found, and if they can get to them soon enough, they're scrubbing them down to try and clean the oil off. Our crews are covering all angles of this story across the Gulf Coast region. Let's begin with Brian Todd. He's in Venice, Louisiana. Brian.
Hi, Fred. Yes, there's a frantic effort to try to prevent some of this oil from getting to the shoreline going on right now. A lot of new tactics being tried. We're going to update you on that right now. As you mentioned, traces of the oil from the leading edges of the oil slick have kind of snaked through some of the barrier islands, the barrier patches. That's the first initial contact with landfall that has been made. But according to BP and according to some of the parish leaders we've spoken to in this region, no significant accumulations of oil have made their way onto shore yet. And as far as the tactics that they're trying, a new one is the use of underwater dispersants. I spoke to a BP official not long ago, and she told me that they tested this out last night. The test went very well, so they're going to be deploying this in large amounts today. Underwater dispersants that can essentially attach themselves to huge clumps of oil, and when they do that, the clumps sink to the bottom. Now, there have been questions about whether these dispersants themselves are too chemically toxic and might themselves harm the environment. BP says that they've gotten clearance from U.S. environmental agencies to use this stuff, so they're going to be trying it in massive amounts today. They hope that that can work and really disperse these clumps of oil underwater before they can make their way onto the shoreline, Fred.
Wow. And so that they tested them yesterday, that they would be doing it today, that's with EPA approval as far as you know?
They say that they've gotten approval to do this. There have been questions as to whether, these chemicals themselves are fairly highly toxic. One environmentalist said that they've been associated with headaches and vomiting when they've been in contact with humans. So I ran that by a BP official, and she said, look, we went through all the processes of the U.S. government to try to get clearance to use this material, including some U.S. environmental agencies that weigh in on the effects on marine life, and we have gotten clearance to use it. So we're going to be digging more into these chemicals, how they're used, what some of their effects are, but BP says they've gotten the clearance, and they work underwater to disperse some of this oil, so they've got to try it.
It is fascinating stuff, and that would be an incredible deterrent if that would help save some of the industries and the wildlife. Brian Todd, thanks so much. We're going to talk a little bit later to a marine toxicologist who will be expounding on that dispersant as well. Join us for the 4 o'clock Eastern hour for that. Meantime, along the Gulf Coast, it is a waiting game. Residents are watching to see what the sea actually brings in, and our Richard Louie is in Dauphin Island, Alabama, with more from there. Richard?
Hey, Fred. Yeah, we're at Dauphin Island. 24 hours ago, we were at the same spot. And I want to take you back to some of the pictures that we had from yesterday. What we saw were 4 or 5 boats around 2 or 3 o'clock local time, feverishly trying to get out those booms and anchor both sides, get out what was, probably about 500-600 yards of these booms to, of course, prevent any potential oil slick from hitting the coast. But as we come back to today, it's much different. 24 hours later, right behind me, you can see those very same booms are now up against the breakwater on the right-hand side here. And once we see those, and then on the left-hand side, we pan a little bit to the left, where there were booms yesterday after they installed them, completely gone. So after 24 hours here, Frederica, we have seen that what the efforts were done yesterday will have to be redone if they are going to try to protect this estuary. And, some of the challenges here is, if these would be booms, and this are one end, this is the other, they have to anchor both sides strongly. And in this case, you can see one side is now loose. And then they also have to calculate, if it's sitting like this when they anchor them down, which was the case yesterday, it also has the potentiality of swinging the opposite way. And that's what has happened here. It has swung the other way and is now hitting the coast. So those are some of the dynamics that we're seeing here over the last 24 hours.
So, Richard, again, that was a great explanation, but I'm wondering, when you panned over and you showed us kind of the one loose boom, might it have broken off? And is that because the tides? I'm looking at the water behind you, which looks like the seas are pretty rough there in the Gulf. Did it break off? Is that also an issue that they're having?
You've hit it right on the head there, Fred. That's what's happened to the left-hand side of this boom right here. it is broken off. The right-hand side is fine, but you also have that dynamic of it switching that arc that I was showing you. To the farther to the left, it's completely lost its moorings and it's gone. I don't even see it against the coast, and you can't see it in eyesight. And those are some of the dynamics. You do see some of that mousse attached to the booms, that mousse being, of course, the tar from the oil, as well as the feathers and the other particulate that might be floating. That's stuck to some of the booms that we've seen so far.
Any idea what kind of wildlife or marine life, bird life that they're most concerned about there in Dauphin Island that they want to protect?
Well, they're concerned about from end to end here when we talk about the ecosystem. We talk with the Sea Lab right down about 300 feet from where I'm at right now. There isn't anything that they're not talking about. What I think also needs to be brought up, I heard you talking earlier about dispersants, is that when I worked in the fuel spill cleanup environmental industry about 15 years ago, dispersants, the debate around it was it buys you some time, but after they pull those little clumps together and the oil falls to the bottom, what happens to that clump? Does it get eaten up by Mother Nature, or do you have to go and harvest it? That was a debate 15 years ago with dispersants, and I can tell today it continues to be something where the question is not quite answered when it comes to some of the solutions, but it does buy them some time.
Yeah, and I can't imagine harvesting actually taking place when you talk about the scale of this, 5,000 gallons per day that are being leaked. Who would have the time or money to harvest it if that were indeed an option later on? But we're going to talk to toxicologists a bit later on about maybe answering some of those questions for us. Richard Louie, thanks so much from Dauphin Island, Alabama. And so